Well, thank you for giving me the platform to speak to y'all. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you so much for speaking with us this morning. So, we're doing this series to give people with disabilities more information about the candidates that they will possibly be voting for during this election, just so they can have a more informed vote. So before we get started, can you just take a second or two to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. My name's Matt Hill. I'm a restaurateur. At one point, I was the youngest bar owner in the French Quarter, and now I've turned restaurants around. I'm running for city council for a multitude of reasons. Just as a citizen, I can't put up with the lies anymore. And with as a manager, like I look at everything that's going on and it just frustrates me to no end. Because as a manager, I want to reach out and make things happen. But until I'm able to be put into the game, I can't do that. Um, but I'm part of a few civic organizations. I'm a Freemason. So we, with Hiram J. Boyd number 3. So we do lots and lots of outreach, mostly on the West Bank. So I don't hit the East Bank all that much. But as far as a platform is concerned, ladies and gentlemen, it's about turning this city around. And what that starts with is changing our attitudes and our attitudes towards change. And New Orleans is so used to the same thing over and over and over again that I hate to say it, but as an electorate, we've accepted failure and mediocrity over and over again. The city hasn't moved the football forward in a long time. And to do that, we have to change the way that we think. Innovation isn't an app on your phone. It isn't glasses that you can get translations through. Innovation's a state of mind, and knowing that no matter what path we choose, there's nothing that's going to stand in our way.
That is so true. So the first of my questions is, what steps would you take to make New Orleans infrastructure and public spaces more accessible for all residents? And how would you ensure that residents with disabilities are at the table when decisions are being made about the city's built environment?
Um, First off, I think we all agree that everything has to be fake. If you're disabled, you're going to have just as much trouble getting across the street as somebody who is perfectly, I guess, able. I don't really know what the word is because it's just so bad. Your streets are flooding just like everybody else's. And this is what the situation is. Everybody wants to fix it. But the reason why nothing is getting fixed is because the internal structures of how we operate from day to day are are wrong. They've been corrupted. I specialize in a thing called Lean Six Sigma. I don't know if anybody here has heard of lean government, but lean government is used all over the United States. And what essentially it does is it goes into every day-to-day routine in every department of every job, and it goes to the frontline workers that says, hey, if you could make your job smarter, quicker, and easier, how would you do it? And you teach them how to map out the process of what their day-to-day routine is so that they can look at it and say, well, we don't need to do this. If we have a work order, we've got 4 different people that need to approve it. What if it was only just one person that needed to approve it? Or what if we had expedited approval process between those 4 people? What if we had a very different system? And if we really want to get the streets fixed, we have to do all that stuff first. Or else we're just going to be stuck in long queues of work orders where we've just got streets backed up and backed up and backed up for months, even years at a time. Now, as far as getting people that need a bit more assistance to the table, ladies and gentlemen, I will invite you everywhere. However, I need you to show up because what's the biggest problem that we have in the city side of the street is the RTA. It's getting around. How are we going to get around? Even the buses that are designed to help people are slow. They're cumbersome. I look at the technology that's being used, and it's 30 years old. There's so much better ways, and I need you to show up at these RTA meetings so I can go after them with a pickaxe and a blowtorch because they do not keep you in mind when it comes to putting things in. Yes, we finally started getting the ADA mats out into, set into concrete at intersections. But cities were doing that 25 years ago. We need to stand up and say, hey, look, we're not going to let you RTA treat us this way anymore. DPW, we're not going to let you treat us this way anymore. And we need a consolidated effort to work on the nitty gritty, not glamorous part of how city functions day to day.
Agreed. So, going along those lines, how will you support economic opportunity for residents with disabilities, and what steps would you take to ensure that jobs across the city, including city jobs and contracts, are truly inclusive and equitable?
Well, for one thing, we don't have a very good, and I'll just use the IV waste situation we had in the French Quarter. We don't have very good transparency when it comes to contracts. And I want to add a lot more transparency to how things are done. And that's honestly how lean government works, because once we start redesigning all of our processes, the transparency and the openness will naturally follow. I think you and I could go onto the Sewage Water Board website and go pull up a dashboard right now, and it's probably going to say that roughly 85 out of the 92 pumps are working right now. Okay, we don't really we don't really know if that's true or not. How do we actually we could have 76 pumps working and nobody updated the dashboard. There's just so many pieces of transparency that will come along with lean government. And let me apples to apples. Hurricane Ida hit us. We and we had so many problems, and then and right now I cannot. It's escaping me right now. The hurricane that hit Houston. I can't remember. It's not Sandy. What was it?
I can't remember either, but I it's at the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. Well, if you notice, they were up and running, fully functional in 3 days. Yes, they were still pumping water, but the entire infrastructure of the city was moving and shaking because lean government gave them the ability to make moves quickly. And the frontline workers and frontline managers were able to make this quick decisions and turn things around. One of the biggest parts of my platform is knocking out the monopolies in New Orleans. Sewage and Water Board being one of them. Look, I truly believe that we need to dissolve the board, move all operations under public works, reform public works so that we have one chain of command, one mission, one job, get the streets fixed, stop the flooding, and make sure we can pump the water correctly. But it all needs to be reorganized. And as far as energy is concerned, I really want to municipalize the lines, take back control of the lines so the city's in control of the power lines. And then we can bring in competitors with energy and start bringing the costs down. And I know I'm talking about economy, and it sounds like I'm talking your pocketbook more than I am about job opportunity. But what we have is an economy that's just stagnated. And y'all need a job just as bad as the guy sitting on the corner of Frenchman and Dauphine, right? What we need to do is create a system where a high tide is going to raise all ships so that we have more competition in the city, better accessibility. Go back to another monopoly is the RTA. I really want them to either get it right or dissolve it. Let's bring somebody else in. Let's make mobility around the city smarter, quicker, easier, and more accessible for everybody. I
Yeah,
think I answered that question.
yes, you did. So what and this kind of ties into all the other pieces, but what is your vision for ensuring that residents with disabilities can access safe, affordable, and accessible housing in every neighborhood of the city? And how would you address both affordability and physical accessibility in those housing policies?
So I'm not completely familiar with what our ordinances are set at right now. I don't know what it says, but I will say this. When I see new construction, I see just the bare minimum done for access for wheelchairs and other disabilities, just the bare minimum. And I don't know if the ordinance calls for something lower and they're technically going above what they're supposed to do, or they're just hitting the very base. If they're hitting the very base of what we're supposed to be doing, that's what needs to change. What we have written into the ordinances with these contracts and accessibility situations, because the truth of the matter is everybody gets hurt at some point in their life. And either a busted leg, busted foot, busted toe, or something. And for just a few minutes, they start to understand what it's like for other people to get around. And I think people will forget that really quickly and not keep that in the forefront when they're designing things, because look, the engineering that we have in New Orleans right now, I think, is a joke. This minimalist, with over engineered, I would say, internals in these buildings is foolish. It's not sustainable, and it doesn't do anything for anybody. And let's face it, a lot of these new buildings are just plain ugly. I do think that we need to have a little bit more standards when it comes to how we set contracts. Now, I want to go into I want to bridge this into the affordability. This is something that hasn't been used since the 70s, and it's earned income housing, where a company will pair with the city and they will go in and they will restore buildings and housing. And what they will do is they give the renter, it's a little bit more than renting. You're not just renting, you're renting to own. But let's say you've been in this house, this program's been going for a while, you've been in this house for 10 years, but you get this great job opportunity someplace else, and you really just can't stay in New Orleans, which is honestly the economy that we have right now. But that aside, when you leave with the company that you have been paying this rent to, you've earned equity. Over time, you could own that house just by renting it out. However, if you leave and have to go, you can take equity with you. You can pull money out of that house because you've paid into that house. And with that, that will give first-time home buyers a little bit of money to take with them, or a house to own outright should they go for it. Granted, it kind of falls into a condo system where the company will, they'll work on the outsides of the buildings, but you'll own the house inside and or the property inside the multi-unit. It hasn't been used since the 70s, and I don't see why. I think we need to start looking at housing completely differently than the way that we've been looking at. And sometimes those old-fashioned solutions are better than these newfangled technology solutions.
So, for my next question, how would you work to expand access to mental health care in New Orleans, particularly community-based services? And what role do you see the city playing in preventing the incarceration of people with mental health conditions?
So there seems to be somebody at my door, but I'm not that worried about that right now. Anyway, so when it comes to our mental health crisis that we have in Orleans Parish, we've ignored it for a very, very, very long time. And I'm not afraid to use eminent domain and take back Charity Hospital from the university system and turn it into the greatest mental health facility this world's ever seen, and or leverage them to do that. I don't believe that turning it into a retirement facility or turning it into an apartment complex is what should happen. I think it needs to be used for something bigger, something that will affect everybody. So just the other day, I did a tour of the mission. I hope everybody's at least somewhat familiar with the mission. It's the I used to would have referred to it as a homeless shelter. It's a lot more than that. And the model that they have is what I believe mental health models should look like, where it pulls people in. They get they get like 21 days to decide whether this is right for them, and it starts to open up. It's a place of peace, job training, spiritual training, mental health advocates there 24/7. So you always got a doctor and psychiatrist on the premises, so that if something happens, it can be dealt with right then and there. I would love to see a system like that expanded across Orleans Parish. And I realize that they are a nonprofit separate from us, and they're not receiving very much monies coming from the city because of the constraints that we hold on the money. And if we go back and look at these constraints and all these things that we say, you got to jump through this hoop and this hoop and this hoop and this hoop, some of these hoops might not necessarily be moving the football forward. And if we can change things around, then I believe that we can expand a system similar to the mission across the entirety of the city.
Great. And how would you advocate for more equitable access to services like Medicaid and other healthcare supports for people with disabilities in New Orleans?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about some nitty gritty here. And I've seen in my time in the restaurant industry, I've seen some fraud, and I've seen some disability fraud. And I know that there are bad actors out there clogging the system. I do believe we, along with the idea of lean government, is making the system a bit more streamlined so that things are easier to access, quicker decisions can be made at a more local level, and the money isn't wasted how much paper they're buying and how many printers they have and how much electricity is being used on things that they don't need. What I think really needs to happen with the accessibility is the system needs to be streamlined. And then it needs to be promoted. Not everybody knows. And people who do have disabilities aren't necessarily hopping on the internet and getting done what they need to get done. And look, I've looked at some of these portals. This stuff isn't easy. You, as an individual, have to jump through a ton of hoops that some of them may be necessary, some of them might not be. But these hoops slow you down. I mean, let's consider, I know this sounds a little off topic, but let's the modern job application. How many people have looked at these modern job applications, started to get into it, and look at how many hoops you got to jump through just to put in a job application? You give up. You're just like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not making 12 more passwords for this, that, and the other. Everything, the tech world has been made so complicated and so heavy that we need to go make things easier, and then people can have access, and then obviously people have to know about it. So outreach is, I would say, the third major tier of the situation. We don't, in Orleans Parish, I've seen little to no outreach when it comes to disabled people and how to access services other than having to go to the library. And then I'd go to the library. Well, either you have to get in your car, you got to go through all these horrible streets, or you got to hop on the bus that's going to be an hour and a half late. And by the time you get there, you're getting hassled by a bunch of people at the front door of the library just to get some information. I think that New Orleans needs to bring the city to the people in a virtual way, smarter, quicker, faster, and was more effective.
And that's all for my questions, but do you have anything to add that we didn't cover?
I want to hit the economy real quick before we go, because I don't know who was here for Katrina and who wasn't. It was a devastating situation, and when we talk about it, we talk about it with a certain reverence. And one of the things that we have done since then is we spent a lot of time rebuilding buildings, trying to rebuild sidewalks and streets, but we haven't done anything about our economy. And Magazine Street kept us floating along with tourism. But ladies and gentlemen, we need real jobs. We need light manufacturing. We need to leverage NASA. We need to leverage the ability to put a SpaceX or one of these other private space companies into Michoud. We need to take our intellectual base right back from Stennis. Look, Mississippi's eating our lunch when it comes to the economy because they're open and they don't house a bunch of monopolies that hold people back from trying to get a startup going. If we want a better economy, we really need to look at what we do from day to day and change our entire attitude towards what this city does and how it does it. But we can become big without losing our identity, because that's why we're here, because New Orleans is our identity. It's a she. I know this sounds weird, but New Orleans is a she, and she picks and chooses. And we've seen who she's picked and chosen. And she really wants us all to get together and make her shine and polish her. And that's really what I want for this city. Thank you for your time. And I would love it. I would love it if anybody would actually reach out to me and let me know what you need, because my brain's only so big and I can only do so much. I don't necessarily know all the situations. So please shoot things at me. I got policies such as putting birth control over the counter. I want recreational marijuana so we don't gotta go to a dispensary and spend, half of our paycheck to just get some relief if you've got cancer or if you have any sort of other situation. Plus, we need to spread the tax base out so that we're not gouging the citizens. And also, I know that a lot of people out there suffer from diabetes. And I really want to make moves to get insulin over the counter, empower our pharmacists so that they can have the tests that you need so that you don't have to be held hostage to the schedule of the doctor and when you can get prescriptions. Once again, we just have to look at everything totally different from the way that we've been doing it before. And it's not wrong to just start going in the opposite direction. We've got opportunities left and right, and the city can't capitalize on them right now. We need to make the city, we need to give the city the ability to capitalize on those opportunities.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm gonna turn off the recording, but thank you so much.
I was going to say, you can turn off the recording, and I'd like to chit chat with you for a minute afterwards.
Of course.